Our next guest earned a degree in English, and then he began a career as a serious songwriter. That's why he's now in comedy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tim Wilson.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom, and you started out in acting, and now you're hosting, so. Hey, you gotta get people back. How are you tonight? Well, I'm glad to be here. Hope you had a nice Easter and Passover if you're Jewish, and hope you had a nice average week for all you atheists. Because I know we've got to respect your right to burn in hell. Oh, wait, don't feel sorry for the atheists now. I always wonder, what do atheists hunt for on Halloween, or Easter? What do atheists hunt for on Easter? A place to hide? I always love coming on television and laughing at atheists, you know? Agnostics always bother me. They're like, well, we kind of believe, but we kind of don't. Well, we kind of do, but we kind of don't. I'm like, well, that's what Peter's going to say when you're at the pearly gates. He's going, well, we kind of want you, but, well, we kind of don't, you know? Have a round of applause for Easter. Thank you very much. I had kind of a weird Easter this year, boy. I don't know, I wound up, I want to say hello to Pete and Brian, a couple of friends of mine. We wound up in their yard half the day shooting the ears off a chocolate rabbit with a 12-gauge shotgun. You know you've lost the feel for Easter when you're standing there with a Remington pump and a straw basket, throwing them up going, pull, pull. Something just ain't right about that. I don't know. But considering it's Egg Week, I just wanted to throw in this little egg story. This is true. It really happened to me. I stopped at a place called Huddle House, which I hope they're not a sponsor. Stopped at Huddle House. Y'all know Huddle House? Not a bad place, Huddle House. You're not quite good enough to be at Waffle House. You're at Huddle House, you know? And the waitress walks over and says, well, what y'all want this morning? I said, I think I'll take me some breakfast. She goes, well, what do you want? I said, well, I think I'll take some eggs. She said, well, do you want regular eggs or do you want egg substitute? I said, well, I think I'll try some of that egg substitute. She said, well, how you want that cooked? I said, boiled. I want to see what kind of shell this comes in. It's a scary world. Well, folks, I'll play you a song here. I'll guarantee you, if you fill out your ballots, go ahead and fill it out, bet your money, because I guarantee you this song is going to win Song of the Year, CMA Awards 1996, and I wrote it. So, this is a guarantee. This is the stupidest song ever written. George Bush, George Burns, George Jones, George Benson, George C. Scott, George Reeves, George Wallace, George Hallis, George Washington Carver, George Jefferson, George Jetson, George Peppard, George Harrison. Boy George, by George, George of the Jungle, George Strait, Chris George, Linda Day George, George Patton, Phyllis George, George Custer, George McClellan, George Foster, George Martin, George Thorogood, George Carlin, George Hamilton, George Raft, George Jessel, Tallulah Gorge, Susan George, Curious George, Georgie Porgy, George Clinton, George Siegel, George McGovern, Jeff George, George Lindsay, George Stanford Brown, George Lucas, George McRae, George Schultz, George Mikan, Gorgeous George Jr., everybody! George Orwell, George Will, Tom Wolfhard, George Goebel, George Michael, George Foreman, Chuck George, a guy I used to go to high school with, Georgetown, George Naismith, George Will, George Montgomery, George Steinbrenner, Georgie Fame, George from Mice and Men, George Allen, George Rogers, George Gipp the Gipper, George Gershwin, George Gervin, Machine Gun Kelly, his name was George Zaharias, George Kennedy, George Brett, George Mitchell, George Stephanopoulos, Chief Dan George, George Blanda, George Plimpton, George McGinnis, George Rogers Clark, George Bernard Shaw, George Seifert, Eddie George, George the Animal Steele, George Pappas the Bowler. And for all you party animals, George Dickel. And George is on my mind. Thank you very much, folks. God bless you. Thank you. What do I do with it?
Give me that.
You take that.
I'll take that.
I'll sit here.
You know, you sit down here where you're supposed to. Right here.
Right here.
There you go. Tim Wilson, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
George. That's probably your real name, right?
Now, the George song, I came up with that. Me and Sandy Pinkard and Richard Bowden used to write songs a lot. And we're sitting around in the Spence Manor one day, writing songs, and I'm tuning my guitar, and I went, George Jones, because we all want to sound like George Jones.
Right.
George Jones. And I said, you know, we ought to make a song where we put like 85 guys named George back to back. And they said, no, we're not. That's not a good idea. So I went and did it myself. I'm on television now, and they're sitting home.
Too funny. English degree. What'd you do with an English degree? Does it fold
I didn't do much with an English degree. You have to be a professional English person to butcher the language as well as I do, Tom.
Oh, yeah?
But I actually I took English because I couldn't think of anything else, and my football coach was an English major. And I ended up with this one English professor. S. Allen King was the meanest man that ever lived, I guess, was my English professor. He reminded me of Strother Martin from Cool Hand Luke. Remember him?
What we have here.
What we have, you're going to have to get your mind right. And I do mean right.
We'd have like 150 grammar sentences. I'd show up for class. We'd walk in, the bell would ring.
He'd go, Mr. Wilson, number 1.
And I'd do it.
Mr. Wilson, number 2.
I'd do it. And we'd just keep going until the end of the class, the bell rang, and I kept going the whole class. So
Okay.
we had
He picked on you.
failure to communicate, me and him. But I'm technically qualified to teach your children grammar. It's a sorry world, isn't it?
I like it. I like it. How much do you use, you know, the Southern influence in your humor? I mean, do you think that really defines what you do?
Well,
Does it give you a certain amount of latitude?
Well, we're getting kind of analytical about comedy here. It defines me to most people because, you know, obviously I have a very thick Southern accent. And I don't know. I mean, I could talk about anything and it sounds Southern. You know what I mean?
Right.
I could talk about... I always tell people I could talk about the 57 Senate hearings, and it would sound like a Southern comedy bit. So, but some people think you might can get away with more being a Southerner. A lot of times I think it hinders you a little bit because there's, you know, some topics that are just... When you're a Southerner, people don't cut you a lot of slack. I don't know, you know?
Well, it's like for some reason there's a certain... they tend to question intelligence a little bit once in a while. When
Well,
you're coming
I
out
don't worry about intelligence questions. Mine's been questioned long ago, and I got over that. But I don't know. That's a hard question.
Well, then we'll
See,
forget about it.
I'm not intelligent enough to answer that question. No.
But you've got a degree.
Yeah, I got a degree. I was the only guy that ever made.
Man.
Well, you dropped. I was the only guy that ever made 2 D's in his major and still got through. So I was home writing intelligent songs like the George song.
There you go.
Great ones like Acid Country.
Oh, hey. Tell me about you got a charity golf tournament coming up.
Yeah, I think in about 2 weeks I'm going to play in a thing called it's the Ronald McDonald House charity. It's putting on a show down in Columbus, Georgia, and I finished doing a week in a theater there this past weekend, and we're going to do it again in 2 weeks.
Hometown?
Yeah, that's my hometown, Columbus, Georgia, which is thank you very much. Which is where Coca-Cola was originally invented in Columbus, Georgia, 1886. And Dr. John Pemberton started out putting, I don't want to talk about it, but started out putting cocaine in the Coca-Cola.
Had a little snap to it, didn't it?
Well, they started putting straws in the top of the bottle. But yeah, we'll be down there in 2 weeks doing that. I'm going to be in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina tomorrow night. And it's Tuesday and Wednesday night at the Comedy Cabana down there. I want to get my plug in.
You got to get that in.
So we'll be there tomorrow night. And if you're in Myrtle Beach, come see us. If y'all going to Myrtle Beach, let's just get in the car and we'll all go together.
That's right. He'll sing the George song the whole way, too.
I'm thinking about writing a song about the amendments.
Yeah?
Like the first through the... How many amendments are there?
24?
24. I'm thinking about writing
that.
a song called the Amendment Song. So if y'all hear it, or you hear it from somebody else, you know they stole it from me. So I can see you people just ready to go out and buy that record. You know what I mean?
Well, you do have a CD you're working on. A new one coming out?
Yeah, I put out 3 albums over since about 1993, and A&M Records just bought our and we're going to make a compilation that we'll have out probably the end of August, 1st of September, and then I've got another one that I'm working on. We'll have out the first of the year, all new stuff.
Well, that's great. We'll get out there and make sure we find it. Mr. Tim Wilson, you
Good to see you again, Tom.
It's always a pleasure, young man. George Jones, George Jessel, George Steinbrenner. Stick around. Mark Colley's going to sing for us right after this. I don't think the song has George in it.
Getting headaches at night was bad enough.